We have Garry Adelman, who will present Gettysburg in 4D. Let me tell you a little bit about Garry. Garry Adelman is Director of History and Education at the Civil War Trust, and he is Vice President of the Center for Civil War Photography. A licensed battlefield guide at Gettysburg, here at the Gettysburg National Military Park for more than 18 years, Garry is the author, co-author, or editor of 20 Civil War books, including Gettysburg in 3D, The Myth of Little Round Top and Devil's Den, A History and Guide, among others. Garry has appeared on numerous productions shown on the BBC, C-SPAN, Pennsylvania Cable Network, and on History, where he was a chief consultant and talking head on the Emmy Award-winning show Gettysburg in 2011. A Maryland resident, Garry earned his BA in business from Michigan State University and his MA from Shippensburg University of Pennsylvania. Please help me extend a warm welcome to Garry Adelman.
Wow. Wow. It's amazing what $500 will buy you when you hand out 20s to the audience. Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here. I'm glad to be first. And to say that I am excited for this commemoration is, for those of you who know me, the grandest understatement I could possibly make. I hope that this is a really meaningful experience for you all to be here 150 years later, which doesn't seem all that far away to me. Including this week, I'll have been to 1/6 of the anniversary since the Battle of Gettysburg. You know, I think that there's a lot of ways to bring the Battle of Gettysburg to bring events long ago closer to us as best we can. And that's, I think, what I want to try to do a little bit of today, at least, in talking about this Gettysburg in multiple dimensions. Because, you know, we all go out to battlefields, right? And you see these battlefields, and you wouldn't be here unless this was of some interest to you. So you go there and you think and you contemplate, right? Now, if you're out there with a battlefield guide, in this case, Dave Richards, you know, they can actually point to things, and you could say, oh, okay, that's where that happened, this is where that happened. And if you're there with a particularly hyper guide, he can do the same thing. All of us do this as guides and rangers. We just sit and point all the time. If somebody is actually out there maybe reading an account, it says, okay, I'm on a battlefield, and somebody's reading an account, even better, right? So I'm starting to get a glimpse of what things were like back then. I think, however, when you take a photograph out to a spot where an old photo was taken, you go out to where it was actually taken, such as this one at Appomattox, or you could do it at multiple places of Gettysburg, we all know that something is going on there. I do this all the time with people. You take an old photo, hold it up, and people are looking past it and seeing what was in the old photo, and something's going on there. I most often hear it clarified as sort of, wow, or this is cool. Well, I strongly feel that when you are taking your natural 3D vision and then you are adding a time element to it by being at the place, by reading an account of a soldier who was there at that place, by taking a photo that was taken there long ago, that you're adding a fourth dimension to things. If you look in the dictionary, the fourth dimension is time. Okay, so I strongly feel that in this fashion, you can leverage your natural 3D vision or other things in order to achieve this fourth dimension. You can look at 3D photos, and let me say, by the way, that, you know, my photos aren't exactly optimized for this screen. Things might look a little bit fatter, so things should look much better than this, and I'll walk around with one of these books a little bit later and show you how they actually should look. But if you're not sure if it's working, go like this, which is always amusing to me when a whole crowd does this, and the background should move from the foreground a little bit. So you could take these 3D photos and go back to the same place today and see the exact same thing. And I don't know of anything closer to time travel than standing in the same place where something happened, seeing those things in 3D, seeing the same place in 3D today, hearing what the soldiers were there said, and all sorts of other things. Now, this is what happens when you do this on our battlefield. Wow, this looks really cool. And you can take those 3D glasses out with a book or something like that and actually stand there and have these cool experiences. Now, what 4D is not is what we have been taught 4D actually is. When you go to an amusement park and they spray water on you, or they, you know, blow some wind through there or something like that, or you smell something, or your seat vibrates, that's not 4D. Since when is a vibrating seat a new dimension? Okay, this is crazy talk. The fourth dimension is available to us all, and I strongly think that that's what's on when we have this thing where we just say, this is cool, okay? This is what look you should have on your face when you go and see a 4D movie or something like that. It's neat and all, but it's not dimensional by any means. Okay? And I think there are lots of great Civil War photos taken in 3D. Most Civil War photos were actually recorded in 3D. And again, in this, one of the best Civil War 3D photos, I strongly feel, because you have something in the foreground, something in the middle ground, and something in the background. I think we can look at these 3D photos in a whole new light. People are not flat. People actually have depth back then. People were actually in color back then. I can't so much help you with that right now. And I think somehow seeing these things in 3D really sets up a little bit better about who these people were and what they were like, and that they were just like us. And more than anything else, aha, that's what it was like. And that's my goal at the Civil War Trust as an education guy, is to try to open up little windows for you all, for anybody that can say that for just a minute. That's what it was like, okay? And that's not just for the Civil War, that's for any historic period. So I think you can really come to understand the Battle of Gettysburg a lot better by using these sort of 3 and 4D techniques. You can see where the battle started on Willoughby's Run on the morning of July 1st, 1863. I hope a lot of you all will go out on Monday morning to this very place. You can see the place where General Reynolds, John Fulton Reynolds, was actually killed right as the fighting really began. You can see one of the, 60 or 70 different trees that were marked as the place of John Reynolds' death. You can see where not only the 150th Pennsylvania, you can see the woods in the background where the Iron Brigade fought. Area where John Burns, the 69-year-old local civilian, came out, asked the Pennsylvanians if he could fight with them, and then ended up fighting in those woods that you can see. You can see where Union troops retreated on the first day, down this horrible railroad cut off of the, right behind Oak Ridge, and you can really see how it would stand out. And in another almost perfect 3D photo, at least when it's sized properly, you got a guy in the foreground gazing off toward the Lutheran Theological Seminary, the oldest active Lutheran seminary in the country, founded in 1826. Again, that is why that photographic assistant is in the foreground. And once you know that, you'll start to see Civil War photos with a bush in the foreground, or with a fence rail, or a person, and very low to the ground. Most Civil War photos are taken in 3D. So they are not only taken in 3D so we could go, wow, check it out. They're taken in 3D with the expectation that you will view them that way, okay? These things, and I'll show you in a minute, were meant to be viewed in 3D only. And even some of the most famous photos of the Civil War that you've seen scores of times, you can actually see are taken in 3D. And by the way, I'm related to all these guys. They were all, they were 70 years apart in age and things like that. Thank you. You can see John Burns is actually maybe a little taller than you would have expected. I don't know. This is him less than 2 weeks after the battle, where he was wounded 3 times. The gun he supposedly used in the battle is right next to him. This is out at his house on the Chambersburg Pike. And here he is with his wife in the house that is no longer there. And in the lower mid-right, you can actually see none other than Matthew Brady, as well as one of his other photographic assistants lounging on the steps there. And Matthew Brady himself. When you think of Civil War photographers, it used to be thought he took every Civil War photos. Then it was found he didn't have very good eyesight, and he actually rarely ever manned the camera. So it was that he took all the Civil War photos, and then he took no Civil War photos. And like most things, it's somewhere in the middle. But Matthew Brady, while he didn't take all the Civil War photos, was literally involved in employing or teaching almost every significant Civil War photographer, from James Gibson to Timothy O'Sullivan to Alexander Gardner to Andrew Russell to George Barnard. All the major names of Civil War photography were in there. And this is an expensive endeavor, okay? These photographers had to pay to keep people in the field using rigs like this that you see right there. They slept in tents. They had mobile dark rooms, or what's-it wagons, or what-is-it wagons, and they had very fragile glass plates that you can see this guy holding there. Let's see if this works a second there. Uh-oh, now it's going to advance again. So you see this guy holding a glass plate there, okay? This is the thing on which most Civil War photos were taken. 4 by 10-inch glass plates, okay? If you remember the 35-millimeter negatives that most of us grew up with, just more than an inch wide and about an inch tall, okay, this thing's about 20 times larger, and unlike a 35-millimeter negative, it doesn't have that sort of grain in it. It's a chemical sheet. Okay, and that's why you can blow these things up like crazy over and over and over again. They're giant negatives, and they're very, very clear. if you take that negative and expose it to the sun with the right stuff, it looks like this, a glass negative, okay, such as this one taken in an unknown location out on the Gettysburg battlefield. If you take it and put a black background on it, it looks like this. So this piece of glass can be a positive or a negative depending on the background. But the key is that once you have that negative, you can put it with some light-sensitive paper and then turn it into things like this, stereo cards. You all have seen this, I think, before. You put them in those viewers, and this is how people saw the Civil War in 3D. This is how people traveled the world and got to see Rome and Greece and all sorts of places in 3D. Now, if you take that stereo card and do what I'm doing today and mix those things together in red and blue, you actually get the 3D photo you're looking at. You can see that these dead Confederate soldiers, probably on the south end of the battlefield, one of which has been disemboweled by a wild animal, and you can see a grave in the left background there. You can suddenly see that it brings a new level of overwhelming reality to it. Reality. Now, a lot of Western theater things, there's a lot of photos taken in the Western theater, but not nearly as many. 90% of Civil War photos outdoor, the documentary ones on battlefields, were taken by Northern photographers in the East. Why were they mostly Northern photographers? This is one way in which the blockade worked, and worked really well. The South didn't have that many chemicals, and those people that did photographic chemicals were much more concerned with the very lucrative portraiture trade. So very few Southern photographers actually went out onto battlefields and Civil War sites after the war really got underway. But here you have Vicksburg. Let's look at the plight of actually a Civil War photographer in the West. Oh, I have an idea. Let me start in Bentonville. Let me travel for 6 days, and I'll get down to Savannah maybe if I'm lucky. Let me take another 3-week-long trip on 10 different railroads and do a lot of walking and get my photographic stuff out to Vicksburg, Mississippi, and spend another day, and maybe I'll go up to Corinth, okay? It is just impractical to photograph the West to a degree. So while you have about 200 photos taken of Gettysburg just the year of the battle, of Shiloh we have 3 in the entire 1860s that we know of. At Chickamauga you have less than 10. But a place like Chattanooga, picturesque, in Union hands, you might have more than 120. Okay? In the East, this is what a Civil War photographer had to deal with. Oh my word, it looks like you could go from Gettysburg to Petersburg and hit almost every Civil War site on the way. Okay? So you can see the difference very clearly between the plight of the Civil War photographer. There. And back to Gettysburg. Robert E. Lee, who did exist in 3 dimensions, okay, he had depth to him. You could see him in command of the Southern Army, and he arrives at Gettysburg on the afternoon of July 1st, 1863, and comes up, uses this house as his headquarters. He is not happy when he gets here. A battle had started without his knowledge and consent, okay? But he's a little bit happier when he's able to see the Union troops streaming back through town, and his troops once again, as they so often were, flushed with victory, chasing the Union troops all the way back on toward town. On the way, during some of this retreat, an 11th Corps soldier named Amos Humiston of the 154th New York is mortally wounded, and he, in his last moments, takes out a photo of his children, and he is found with that photo on his breast in a very famous photograph. Well, this photo showed the place where he was killed. Okay, or where he died at least. Now, and this is 1867. So at Gettysburg, unlike other places, because Gettysburg was the biggest battle of the Civil War, because Gettysburg was the first battlefield to be preserved within a month of the battle, tracts were being purchased by a local group, okay, on East Cemetery Hill, then on Culp's Hill and Little Round Top. And with the Gettysburg Address here in November, sort of solidified Gettysburg as the mecca of all Civil War sites. Even where one soldier died, one famous soldier, he gets a photo of the spot where he died. The Union troops retreated back to East Cemetery Hill, and in the foreground here, Stevens Knoll, where you can see some very impressive lunettes, half-moon-shaped fortifications designed to protect cannons, okay, and artillerymen, of course. You can really see the strength of these things in 3D, and you can see East Cemetery Hill in the background quite well, I think. And of course, the Union would form their stronghold here on Cemetery Hill. Here, the most iconic structure probably at Gettysburg, that and General Warren's statue maybe, the Evergreen Cemetery Gatehouse. Again, with a fence post in the foreground, with the gatehouse in the middle ground, and of course a soldier in the background through the gate. The fighting, nothing would really happen of consequence for the next 24 hours other than that both sides would bring the remainder of their troops here until Lee maybe has 65,000 soldiers and Meade has maybe 75 or 80,000 soldiers at that point. And the Union, as you know, shape of a fish hook, and some of the fighting would really heat up here at the Round Tops on the afternoon of July 2nd, 1863. Here, a great 3D photo taken from the Wheatfield Road looking out toward Little Round Top, Big Round Top on the right. Matthew Brady in the wagon in the middle ground. And here, a 3D photo, of course, of war's destruction. Here at the foot of Round Top, right where they later built a trolley trail, are some dead Confederates. A total of 6 are photographed in this location, and I can't stress enough how rare this is. This is the rarest of the rare of all things in the Civil War. Because the Civil War started, of course, in 1861, and there weren't a lot of things to photograph. Okay, Fort Sumter, yeah. And then you have the Battle of Bull Run, and the Union photographers couldn't gain access to it. Okay, it was a huge Southern victory, so the Union photographers couldn't get it. But yet, you do have this one photo called Dead on Matthews Hill, showing dead soldiers on Matthews Hill. If you look at it closer, I'll ask you to take a look at some of these soldiers as well as the leaning tree in the middle ground, because the next thing I'm going to show you is another photo that, you know, makes you question this a little bit. Here you have some guys. It's a summer battle. They're wearing overcoats, and oh, hold on. There's a photo of these same guys very much alive in the exact same spot. Oh, hold on. There's even another one. Okay, so I guess what happened is that these 4 soldiers were shooting at some Confederates or something like that, and then suffered 100% casualties. And the photographer was unhurt, and they let him alone, and he went back and shot them on his glass plate, forever capturing it. Or maybe the photographer asked them to play soldier and then play dead. Okay? So it was not easy to secure real photos of dead. Okay? In the Civil War, in my opinion, is where photojournalism was created. In fact, American wars had hardly even been covered in any fashion in a documentary way. And before the Civil War, I think that there was a real glorified version of war. Here, in a definite documentary 3D photo, you're going to have Confederate Union graves on the first battlefield of Bull Run, but they're not fresh graves. Still, it's a first. You have it several months after the battle. On the Virginia Peninsula, in June of 1862, they're making new strides toward photojournalism, and here you have a field hospital at Savage's Station. These guys had fought the day before the Battle of Gaines's Mill, and here are some of the wounded being tended to at Savage's Station. Most of these wounded would be captured the next day after this photo was taken on June 28, 1862, what some have called the first great documentary photo of the Civil War. Not too long after that, you have more fresh graves, just the day after on the Battle of Cedar Mountain. And you also have, for the first time, dead horses on an American battlefield. So they're making huge strides from March until August of 1862. This is when documentary photography comes of age. Dead horses on a battlefield, especially in 3D, but they still had not achieved the thing they were looking for most, the true human cost of a battle on a battlefield. And they did achieve that at Antietam the following month, September of 1862. Okay, you can see a horrendous row here of dead soldiers lined up for burial at Antietam, right near the visitor center, as a matter of fact. And what you have here, of course, is 4 wounded at most battles for every dead soldier. And then you could get an idea of the real human carnage of battle. I can't stress enough how much these photos shocked the public. Okay, these are not the glorious moments that they had heard of. In fact, horrible scenes. These are lonely scenes. These are bloated soldiers far from home, sometimes pressed to the earth, unidentified, lonely. Okay, it shocked the public. Matthew Brady, when he put these up in New York in October of 1862, one correspondent from the New York Times famously said, if Mr. Brady has not taken the bodies and laid them in our dooryards, he has done something very like it. Okay. Just the following month, a St. Louis photographer named Nicholas Brown actually secured 3 photos, the only photos of dead on a Western battlefield in front of Battery Robinette at Corinth. And it is just about the only photo of the Civil War that actually has somebody identified. The soldier on the far left is Colonel Rogers of the 2nd Texas. In May of 1863, in the Second Battle of Fredericksburg, as part of the Chancellorsville campaign, 1 photo of a dead soldier was taken at the sunken road. And of course at Gettysburg, where you have 37 photos of dead taken on the battlefield. Okay, 37. And look at the clarity of this photo. These same bodies are photographed in 2 different directions, a total of 5 negatives. Remember, you have 5 negatives of these bodies, and in the entire battlefield of Shiloh, one of the bloodiest battles of the Civil War, you have 3 photos of the entire battlefield in the 1860s. Okay, so Gettysburg has a real photographic concentration as well. 7 more photos were taken of a burial crew at Fredericksburg in 1864. 6 photos of a group of soldiers at Spotsylvania. and 23 at Petersburg. That's a total of 97 photos of dead soldiers in the entire Civil War. All the Civil War books you've ever looked at, all the documentaries, if the soldier in those photos is actually dead, there are only 97 of them from 6 different places. Okay, so there's a very small percentage, and 37 of those 97 are taken at Gettysburg, 23 at Petersburg, 20 at Antietam. So you've got more than 80% of the photos of dead taken at 3 different places and 3 different places only. So these things are rare. And to that end, you can understand Gettysburg, I think, a little bit better here, such as this view in the slaughter pen. And if you look at this thing enough, you could see soldiers just dotting the terrain around the horrible rocks at the foot of Big Round Top. And even this one called All Over Now, a great 3D photo of a much taller than you would have expected soldier. Bloated, drenched by recent showers, emitting odors of the most offensive nature. This poor soldier had been lying motionless in death for 4 days or so when Alexander Gardner and his crew happened upon him and took this photo and probably intentionally left his face out of this photo. Another dead Confederate in a photo that you rarely actually see at the base of the triangular field, inside the triangular field, as a matter of fact, and you can actually see some sort of a shelter for a wounded soldier probably off to the left. These are some of the second day's fighting. By the time Alexander Gardner and his crew, the only crew to photograph dead at Gettysburg, got onto Little Round Top, most of the bodies had been buried, so they decided to focus 3D photography on these wonderful shots of the breastworks. You can see they're not just jumbled breastworks, rather you can see the tent poles that these guys had used just a few days before for their shelter halves. You can see the stone walls that were built just after the battle. A lot of good it did them then. And you can see a beautiful Matthew Brady photograph on July 15th or so, 1863, where you can really not only see the true depth of these photographs, but you can also see the field of Pickett's charge and the whole Union line in the background. You can also see in the upper right the rock on which General Warren's statue would eventually be erected. And here, in a 2D photograph, you can see it just looks like a mess. It's an awful photo, but what I'm going to do is turn this over into a 3D photo, and you can see the difference between them. Suddenly, you can see what the photographer was thinking. These are curving breastworks all over the top, the very crest of Little Round Top. On the crest, there were stone walls back then, something we don't know now because there are paths up there so we can go up and see these places. After the fighting at Devil's Den and Little Round Top, the fighting devolved onto the wheat field, what I think is about the bloodiest place at Gettysburg. It moved on toward the Rose Farm, where more photos were taken of dead soldiers than anywhere in the entire Civil War. And for those of you around on July 4th, we'll be out there with huge 3D photos where these things were taken at 7 a.m. for only the diehards. But here, you can see some of the dead Confederates of probably Paul J. Semmes's brigade. In the background, Alexander Gardner's developing wagon. In 3D, you can actually see into the back of the wagon. This photo was developed in that wagon. Wrap your brain around that. The fighting continued on to a weak point in the Union line at the Peach Orchard. No early photos of the Peach Orchard, no even really good 3D photos of the Peach Orchard. And after the Confederates rolled over that position, they're going to move on toward the Trosel House, where they're, in an attempt to capture cannons, they're going to shoot horses down, some of which appear in these horrible photographs at the Trosel Farm. Horses were too big to bury, so they generally gathered horses together into big heaps and burned them, okay? And the grotesque pyres from these fires, when they wafted over the battlefield, created this fog of foulness that you could smell from more than a mile away. The Southerners did not capture Little Round Top. They did not break through the Union line. You can call it a stalemate, but the Union are sort of in possession of the ground they wanted to be in possession of. So the fighting swirls over to the other side of the Union line, to East Cemetery Hill, which you can see here, and Culp's Hill as well. These attacks were supposed to take place at the same time, but as most of you know, they did not. So this fighting starts almost at twilight and at dusk. Here, you can see some of the Union lunettes, those demi-luned fortification, and this helps us understand where the cannons actually were, helps us solve mysteries about the Battle of Gettysburg. The Southerners actually captured the crest of East Cemetery Hill before actually they were pushed back by Union soldiers, some of who advanced directly through the Everton Cemetery. You know, and I don't care if you have 2,000 troops or 1,500 troops. If there's a big iron grate fence in front of you, you don't march through that thing. You got to march around it. These things were not built with movement of soldiers in mind, and it was very difficult to get through the cemetery. But ultimately, Union troops will pour past the gatehouse that you see here and onto East Cemetery Hill beyond. And that is the story of Gettysburg. Wherever the Southerners were able to really make some gains, you are going to have Union soldiers arrive as part of their interior lines, where General Meade is shifting soldiers back and forth constantly throughout the battle. And wherever the Southerners enjoyed some sort of success, they are going to be pushed back by heavy and impressive Union reinforcements. the fighting moved over to Culp's Hill as it actually got into the dark, which is very odd, where the Union had luckily built some impressive fortifications. You can see in this 3D photo that these things are made of earth. They're made of rock. They are made of wood. And you can also see how they curve sort of as they go around, so that you can see that if a Southerner got up closer toward those breastworks, they could be shot at from two different sides. Impressive works, and undoubtedly helped the Union hold what I think is one of the two most important hills at Gettysburg, Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill. Note that Little Round Top is probably third or fourth on that list. Early photographers were obsessed with the look of Culp's Hill. Here you had something near town. You know, it wasn't easy to tour the battlefield right after the battle, where people could see actual destruction of battle. Here, bullet-scarred trees and a Brady assistant playing dead on the battlefield. And another beautiful photo, not only showing bullet-scarred trees and a Brady assistant, but a rock that we know was used by Confederates as they got close to the crest of Culp's Hill. But by July 3rd, you're going to have Robert E. Lee thinking he has an advantage here. The Southerners had gained some trenches on July 2nd, but by July 3rd, he sent some reinforcements over. But just like on every other place, General Meade sent more reinforcements over. And in the most sustained fighting at Gettysburg, in the distance of this photo at the left, you can see lower Culp's Hill. Spangler Spring is just inside the trees over there. Union soldiers in 7 hours of fighting will end up pushing the Southerners off of lower Culp's Hill. No early photos of Spangler Spring, but it had become so famous that we have lots of later photos. The myths talk about how Union and Confederate soldiers forgot their differences for a while and fraternized at the pellucid waters of Spangler Spring. Now, we do know that both sides used it, and we have 3 accounts that both sides were actually there at the same time. But all 3 of those accounts talk about how one side or the other came up to the spring, and then when they realized they were among the enemy, they got out of there. Okay, so a shred of truth in every myth. On the night of July 2nd, General George Gordon Meade is going to gather his most trusted generals in his headquarters here. You can see dead horses littering the ground from what would happen the following day on July 3rd. Both Lee and Meade actually made their headquarters at the farms of widows, Leicester and Thompson. Meade decided to stay and fight it out, and of course that will result in Pickett's charge later on July 3rd, 1863. And in this photo, I think he thought he was getting General Meade's headquarters, but did end up getting a photo of the Bryan Farm, which is right near where the Southerners actually broke through the Union line. You know, when you read about the copse of trees or other places where the Southerners, these armies are giant. The attack was huge, so they hit the Union line in more than one place. It wasn't the angle. They hit it up north toward the Bryan Farm. Here you can see part of the field of Pickett's charge beyond the house. And again, the house looks fat in this photo to me. It's not quite that fat. That is a formatting thing. And let me just take a quick sec to walk around here. If you can look at me with your glasses, even just holding these things not even straight, you can see what these photos are supposed to look like in 3D. They shouldn't look fat, and you basically should be looking through the book toward me. Okay, there's incredible clarity in these photos, incredible clarity. And I'll bet you all in the back can even kind of see through these things as thumbnails as I go. Okay, so this is what you should really be seeing on these screens ideally, but even 21st century technology, it's tough. Okay, I'm sure the guys back there blaming me for not making a better PowerPoint. Yeah, it's true. So Pickett's charge, intense indeed. We don't have any early photos close-up of the clump of trees. 1882 is as early as we can get, and you can see, where are the monuments? Okay, that's the clump of trees over there on the right. Okay, I don't see a road. I don't see barely even any of the Union fortifications. Okay, imagine the unsullied front there. Of course, that's perfectly appropriate that soldiers came back and monumented their great deeds when they came here. This was a horrible event for any town to go through. Remember that when the Civil War started and the Battle of Bull Run actually occurred, it was the bloodiest battle in American history by far. By 4 or 5 times to my knowledge, okay? And that was 4,500 casualties or so. All of a sudden, Gettysburg comes along, 51,000 casualties. Nobody's ready for that stuff. And by the way, there's no FEMA. There's no Centers for Disease Control. And by the way, if you were to say, hey, there are these little things and they live on you, and some are good and some are bad, and you know, you better watch out for the bad ones because they're going to make you sick, they would lock you up. That whole lacking of germ theory thing, which a few people were starting to develop back then, you would have been thought you were crazy, okay? So what you have, instead of insurance companies and CDC and FEMA, is you have little houses like this. David Wills' house, and this one, the Fahnestock brothers' house, in the town of Gettysburg, where you are going to have supplies being gathered under the U.S. Sanitary Commission. You're going to have people coming here to find out if they can find out where their dead relative is. This is how they tried to sort of take care of, in a humane fashion, some of the wounded soldiers and deal with some of the dead that were around the battlefield. Sketch artists came almost right away. They didn't need the cumbersome equipment of a photographer. All they needed was a pad and a pencil. So people like this guy, Alfred Wood, came and perched up on a rock to have his photo taken. That's his actual sketch pad. We have some of the sketches that were made on that pad. Pretty cool. You can see his left foot is actually going into a specific crack on the rock. And if you go back there today, you can sit in the exact same spot, put your foot in the same place. You can see that there's like a place for your butt to go. Sit there. You can see why he sat there when you try it. These are the same rocks that were there during the battle. Okay, they were there a lot longer before that. They're more than 200 million years old. But there's something about this. I've sat probably 500 people in this location, and everybody knows something's going on when you do that sort of stuff. It's something beyond just, wow, this is cool. There's something else happening, and I think it's a 4D experience. Of course, when the photographers did arrive, as I mentioned, they secured photos of the dead. And for those of you who can see, you see two lines of soldiers in the foreground, one in the foreground, one on the left. And if you look toward the background, you might actually be able to see the true glory of war here. A soldier, face pressed to the earth, far from home, and in complete conflict with 19th century America, his pants around his knees. Okay, could you imagine if this is your son? Okay, before the Civil War, you were going to be killed, and people will imagine you at the top of a parapet with a flag draped across your breast and maybe a little blood trickling from the edge of your mouth. No, this is what the war looked like. These are horrible photos, and they shock the nation, such as this one. Maybe the most gruesome photo of the entire Civil War. A soldier who had been killed in the battle, who's bloated due to the effects of putrefaction and has been mauled and disemboweled by an animal. His parts are literally visible for all to see. His hand is detached. Part of his arm is missing. You can go back to these places out on the battlefield. This one on the Rose Farm. William A. Frazanito located most of the photos of all the dead where they were photographed at Gettysburg. So these places are still there. Here, Southerners lined up for burial out on the Rose Farm. The rock on the far left is still there. We know exactly where these things were taken. Most of the Southerners remained in the ground for about 8 years until removed south by a Southern ladies group. Here's how the look of the trenches looked before they were removed. This burial trench is still there on Culp's Hill. The rock in the far right background is still visible on Culp's Hill. We know just where this trench is to this day. Okay, but eventually they would be removed, mostly as unidentified piles of bones. But we do have impressive lists of some of these soldiers. No dog tags during the Civil War, but we do the best we can, and we've been able to solve some of these mysteries. The dead horse is all over the battlefield in 2D or 3D. Another photo that has not been located. We don't know where this one was taken. Not a whole lot to go by. Abraham Lincoln, of course, here in 3D. Come back here in November of 1863 and deliver his Gettysburg address. We have 4 different photographers here. Only one, it would appear, was able to capture anything really recognizable about him during the actual ceremony. But here you have an impressive photo of the crowd. I think the crowds this week at Gettysburg will make this look like a little warm-up exercise. We shall see. Supposedly 15,000 people were there, but you see the Evergreen Gatehouse. You can see the bulge in the crowd. That's where the speaker stand was. And after that cemetery, it wouldn't take long till people started placing monuments on the battlefield. The first one completed 1867. Here you have the first Minnesota urn actually in the National Cemetery. And around that same time, within a year of the battle, you're going to have the guy standing tallest here up on the wagon, John Badger Batchelder, the first historian of the Gettysburg battlefield. Okay, and thanks to him, he walked the field with veterans, asked them questions, wrote them down, put a stake in the ground, saying this is where Colonel such and such said his right flank was. This on Little Round Top. People were still obsessed with Culp's Hill. The bullet-scarred trees started dying, and soon the field where all those trees were, the area where all those trees were would become a field. Only one tree would survive in that area. The veterans came in greater numbers. The 1870s wore on. Eventually, the stewards of the park grabbed whatever cannon barrel tubes that they could, put them up on stones, and here, veterans wearing their badges would sit and talk about the Civil War. But on the battlefield itself, the first monuments were not put up until 1878. Okay, this one to Fred Taylor was one of the first 2 on Houck's Ridge below Little Round Top. The veterans would come back on both sides. Here, Confederates that had claimed the capture of Smith's cannons. 3 of the cannons under James E. Smith's 4th New York Light Artillery were captured during the Battle of Gettysburg. 3 of the whole 7 that the Southerners captured at Gettysburg came from that battery. So they met with members of Smith's battery, stood at the battery's location, which most certainly was not there in that location at the time of the battle. 1888, probably the most iconic single monument of the Civil War, if not just at Gettysburg, General Gouverneur Kemble Warren was put up on a rock on Little Round Top. And individual regiments would eventually, on the Union side, have at least one monument for almost every regiment. These guys, the 69th Pennsylvania at the angle, were able actually to outdo everyone else by putting company-level markers along to say, this is where our right flank of Company A was. This is where our left flank of Company A was. Now, by the way, most of you all are going to spend more time in Gettysburg this week than the soldiers did. Okay, when you go on a 3-hour tour of Little Round Top, okay, generally speaking, you are spending more time on Little Round Top than Joshua Chamberlain in the 20th Maine ever did, members of the 83rd Pennsylvania did. And I would like to think that nobody's shooting at you, okay, that you're not losing some of your best friends, okay? And we have roads and monuments to look at to understand, okay? They had none of this stuff. Okay, so some of these monuments are more correct than others, but let's give veterans a break, okay? I'll bet you all can't agree on what happened last year at this event. If we were to ask, we'd get 100 different responses. Let's give the veterans a break. It was intense. They didn't get to study it the way that we get to study it, and they had nothing to go by. A huge observation tower was erected on East Cemetery Hill. Eventually, it would be removed to make room for Winfield Scott Hancock's memorial. They would put up other towers. The War Department erected 5 steel observation towers around the battlefield, and eventually they're going to provide a great view. 2.5 of these things are still left. This one on Cemetery Hill, or Cemetery Ridge, was removed to make room for the Cyclorama building, which, hold on, wait. Now that has been removed as well. And man, does it look great. I stood in Scott Hartwig's office the other day on the grass, and you can't even tell it was there. Great job by the park and the foundation in this case. The battlefield would take on the look that we know today when the U.S. government took over in 1895. It's the battlefield we know. Observation towers, the plaques we all recognize. And for a while, there were cannonballs and decorative guard chains along some of these places. The park has long been a recreation area. Here, a swimming hole at a dammed-up Rock Creek. And veterans would come back to this same battlefield and stand there and talk about what had happened before. And this is very interesting to me. You know, these monuments, a lot of people deplore them and say, oh, there's too many at Gettysburg, it's cluttered, and maybe they're right. But the veterans came back, and when they dedicated monuments, they gave speeches. And when they looked at that monument, they said, in 12 feet north of here, your colonel breathed his last, okay? And in a way, what you have is soldiers that are here in 1863 coming back in 1913 and using a monument that was erected in 1888 or a road that was erected in 1901 to tell us in 2013 what happened in 1863. Okay, the battlefield is a great teaching tool, a great outdoor classroom ready to be leveraged by historians and visitors. Of course, you have, one of the most famous photos of the Civil War was taken in 3D as well. This sort of a failed 3D version, it's good in 3D, but it's not a very good photo. You can't really see Little Round Top behind it. It's poor quality as it goes. But because of this photo and because of the captivating nature of this site, I think you're going to have other photographers grab it after that. There was a larger version of this taken with a bigger camera that's one of the most famous photos of the Civil War. I know you know this. So other photographers would capture this stone wall area as well, such as here in 1867 or here around 1900, okay? Now, I've taken thousands of people to this particular site before. Man, and I have seen people cry. I've seen people get mad at me for taking people there. I've seen people absolutely transfixed. I've seen people obsessed. I've seen people do what I did on my first trip, okay? And second trip and third trip and fourth and fifth trip, and fifth, sixth, and seventh, and you get the idea. You become a battlefield guide, and people ask you to lay down there, okay? And you know what? This isn't for everybody. I think everybody engages in Gettysburg a little bit differently, right? Okay? I've seen people have every range of emotion at this site. And you know what? I think that you can have your Gettysburg commemoration. You can have a celebration of what the soldiers went to. You can have a freak-out experience 4D moment, whatever you'd like. You can take your kids there, if you'd like, when they're only 6 weeks old, and just punish them by putting them in the same place as well. And that's the least of what my kids have to put up with. here before they were 2 hours old. I have each of them with William A. Fresnito's books, without which I would not be speaking to any of you all, without which they would not even exist, because I met my wife in Gettysburg. So they better. They don't have to like the Civil War. In fact, because of me, they'll probably hate it. But they have to at least respect it. And you can go back to this place and hundreds of places on the battlefield, whether there was a photo taken or not, and engage with this great place that all of us, obviously if you're here, care about. It was federal land, so the battlefield has been used by the federal government for a long time, okay? Here around World War I. 1938, at the last reunion of the blue and the gray, you're going to have FDR dedicating the Peace Light Memorial. And you have 1,800 or 2,000 Union and Confederate veterans here. It was a very hot weekend. Okay, these guys are old. Their average age is 94. And in 1938, 94 is very old. The people who planned this event were happy and satisfied that only 7 of the veterans died when they came to this event. Okay, they were dying off, and soon they would all be gone. I think the foundation has slightly higher goals for this particular event this week. Not at a higher number, I mean a lower number. But these are the veterans that were in the battle, walking around a tent, not unlike this one, on this battlefield. Okay? These are the guys who fought in the Civil War, telling their stories, telling what had happened so long ago. These are the guys who saw it, the last living witness, and they would all be gone by 1956 or so. Some of you all in this tent had the chance to meet Civil War soldiers. Maybe you did. I only missed it by 11 years. Okay? This Civil War is not that far away, and we can use whatever technique we can to try to understand it just a little bit better. And I'm just blown away when you look at this photo here of the Peace Light Memorial at the dedication. These are Civil War soldiers that see a movie camera. There are planes flying around overhead, automatic machine guns being fired. Civil War soldiers seeing machine guns, planes, and everything like that, and color motion pictures. Okay? It's not that far away from what we are today. And I hope when you engage out on the battlefield that you think about this 4D stuff. The photos themselves, of course, would end up in various repositories. First, in Matthew Brady's nephew's home, like that. That's the National Archives collection. But for my money, if you're going to do anything, go to the Library of Congress, where they have them, or just online to loc.gov, and where they have the original glass prints. I took this photo, and there in front of me is the original plate of the dead sharpshooter that was in the camera when that was taken. There's General Lee at Richmond. The original plates are still there. And they scan them at very high resolution, so you can download them for free and do some of this stuff. I have no, claim to do this to the exclusion of anyone else. You could all go out and do it. Download your own photos. Go to the Civil War Trust website and use your glasses here. You can leave them behind or take them with you. And go and check out some of these 3D photos. Go to the Center for Civil War Photography's website. They're on there. They're free. You can use them and engage the Civil War from your computer. And because I work for the Civil War Trust and we work with the foundation all the time, please note that 30 acres of battlefield land are lost to development every day. The Trust has saved more than 800 acres of the roughly 6,000 here at Gettysburg, or 8,000, depending on how you count it. So go to civilwar.org and check out some of the great stuff there. Thank you very much. Sure. That was all one sentence, by the way. I'm pleased. I'll be glad to take a few questions. Cindy will hand you the mic if you have one. They can be about the Civil War or Star Wars. Wow. Well, if there aren't any, I'll be going inside to sign books. Gettysburg in 3D. There's also one on Antietam. Oh, there is a question.
Garry, when obviously Brady and other photographers are trying to make a profit off these pictures, and if I went into Brady's studio and wanted to buy a picture, what would I buy?
Well, it depends. That's a great question. What would he be buying if he went into Brady's studio? First of all, these were lavishly appointed places. They would let you inside, and you could buy a pre-taken photo, of course, of a famous individual, a stereo card from a battlefield, a 3D photo that you could bring into your parlor at home. You could buy a carte de visite, a small photo of George Gordon Meade, or Robert E. Lee, or William Barksdale, depending on where you went in, okay? And you could get one of those things. But you could also go upstairs further, where they're going to prep you to have a photo taken yourself, in which case they might dress you up, talk to you, make the sale, and you might spend $10, you might spend spend $6 if it's just a little carte de visite. You might pay $1 for the sitting and then 25 cents for additional prints of these cartes de visite. But then they would take you upstairs and set you on up, and then they would take your photograph. Sometimes they would take it with one lens. If you were famous, they might take it with 4 or 8 at a time, so that when they printed them, like a photocopier, they could make more at the same time. Okay? If you wanted what is called an imperial print, it costs about as much as it would today, $200 perhaps, for a huge glass plate thing like this. Of course, we don't need the glass anymore to have it done. Okay? So you could spend real money on these things. Remember, you could not print these photos in books or newspapers at the time. You had to convert them into engravings, or to make a book, paste a photo in. Alexander Gardner's sketchbook of the Civil War, and George Barnard had a version of this as well. They are pasted in, and they were very expensive at the time. They're still expensive. When you see them on eBay, don't bid against me. I think I see one back there, or is he just waving to, they're just waving to friends, but I think I see one.
There you go.
Thank you so much. Garry, where is that picture located where you see Matthew Brady standing in front of the watering hole off of McPherson's Ridge?
Yeah.
Where is that water hole like today where the park road would be?
Yeah.
Is that, what side of Chambersburg Pike?
Okay, so if you go to the Chambersburg Pike, the question is that photo I showed right at the very beginning of Matthew Brady standing near a watering hole. What it actually is a quarry pit that had filled up with water, and you're talking about this photo. You can't see Brady in it, but it's this photo right here. And this photo was taken, if you go out the Chambersburg Pike and turn left, not right, don't pull over at Reynolds Statue, turn left and go down Stone Avenue. You pass the McPherson Barn over on your left. Then it will be just past the McPherson Barn on your left. And that pit, this hole, that fence, a different fence, but in the same place, is perfectly aligned. So turn left on Stone Avenue and park, and it's right there. You'll see it right inside the fence along Stone Avenue on the left side of the road. Okay, this is the one you meant, right? Good. Other questions?
Over here.
Okay, there.
Yeah. I understand there was a period when all of a sudden the photographs that were being taken lost their interest, and they were used in greenhouses and other places. Can you talk about lost photographs that went on through of the Civil War?
And as always, I'm not going to answer the question directly because Civil War photography and the Civil War are just full of myths. One of them, of course, is that Matthew Brady took all the photos of the Civil War. Then he didn't take any. Another one is that because Alexander Gardner's crew moved one soldier for a photo at Devil's Den, that soldier at the dead sharpshooter was moved about 70 yards to another location. People think photographers are moving bodies all over the place. And this greenhouse thing won't die. Thanks, Ken Burns. We know which photos were taken in the Civil War. We have catalogs from Matthew Brady's, from the Anthonys, who made the stereo views, and Alexander Gardner. And yes, there were some historic photos taken in, put into greenhouses, but these would be cracked plates. These would be portraits. These would be photos of your local town. The Civil War photos were absolutely not destroyed in greenhouses. Okay, absolutely not. Having said that, Civil War photography has experienced peaks and valleys, even right after the war was over. It's not like people rushed out to buy photos of this horrible conflict. They were sold during the war, then there was a valley, and then it went up again with a big series in the late 1860s. A lot of photographers are very active on various battlefields. The biggest one, the War for the Union, thousands of Civil War photos, and they sold pretty well. You can tell which ones sold well because those are the ones you see on eBay. Don't bid against me. Okay, so we know that they weren't lost, and there have been peaks and valleys. And in fact, you know when Civil War photos didn't sell that well? In the 40s, during World War II. Who wants to see other photos of dead soldiers and horrible destruction on battlefields? Then they came up again, and they went down again in the 60s. Vietnam. And after that, you know, starting with the 80s, especially in the late 80s, and then with Glory and Ken Burns and the Killer Angels and various things like that, that's when the modern preservation movement was really born, and that's also when we have an unheard of interest in the Civil War, which is why I think this will be a very crowded week.
Garry, the picture of the Evergreens gatehouse started at the beginning of the presentation. There's an individual to the right of it.
Yes.
Do we know who that is?
Yeah, well, we don't know his name. Who is to the right of the Evergreen Cemetery at the very beginning, the gatehouse? He's one of Matthew Brady's assistants. You can pick out his puffy shirt in the photo at Lee's headquarters. He's the one laying down, playing dead at Culp's Hill. We do not know his name. No Civil War photographer, save one, seems to have left any sort of a journal. And the one that does exist is in a private collection. The guy won't let any of the content out because he wants to sell it for $1 million. So he won't do that. So we really don't know a lot about these photographers, and I've studied this stuff for 30 years, and I still can't identify most of the assistants that appear in the photos. We know their names in some cases. That could have been David Woodbury. We have colloquial names for him. That guy, sometimes we call him Shaggy because he has shaggy hair, but we just don't know. Sorry.
Yes, considering the photograph of Lincoln at the Gettysburg Address, where only the top of his head is somewhat vaguely apparent, how certain are we that that image is truly of Lincoln?
You know, of the one verified photo, I consider of the various theories, and just this is one of those other things. Everybody with a top hat on eBay is Lincoln. Even if it's taken in the 1870s, it's Lincoln. Okay, it drives me crazy. So as far as this, we know where he was. We know he was on the speaker stand. We know roughly where he was on the speaker stand, okay? So that one I consider verified because it looks like him. He's in the right spot. If you even guess on some of them, you can see Ward Hill Lamont. You can see, I think, Edward Everett and David Wills and all these other people. I have very little doubt that that's him there on the platform. Now, as to all the other theories that attempt to recognize Lincoln on the platform or arriving, none of those in my mind are verified. It's really tough stuff to know. No photographers were close to the event. They were all, one was in the gatehouse, two were back behind the crowd, another one across the Tawnytown Road, so they're all over the place. It's a really difficult thing. As to verified, it just has the support of the various scholars, and none, especially William A. Frazanito, who has kind of ended up as maybe not the, but an, if not the arbiter for Gettysburg photos, which is very frustrating to some people because he's a hard dude to convince of things. Very hard. Last one, Cindy will choose. And I'll take other ones back at the table or things like that.
Thank you. To what extent would you say the pictures taken at Gettysburg would have had on the presidential election of 1864?
My experience towards Civil War photos is that you would think that they see these horrible photos maybe, and then that people say, oh my God, this is so awful, we have to end this war. But from what I can tell, people did say that. But just as many people said, oh my word, look at their sacrifice, we have to continue this war, okay, as Lincoln said during the Gettysburg Address. So I cannot tell any appreciable difference one way or the other, not only on that question of the election of '64, but in general about the election, about Civil War events. I can't tell a lot of ways that Civil War photography greatly impact huge national events such as that election. And let me just say, I am so happy to be here this week. I'm so glad you all came out early this morning. I hope you have a very meaningful week, whatever that means for you here at Gettysburg. And I don't want to say happy anniversary, but happy commemoration of the Battle of Gettysburg. Thank you.